Welcome everyone to LowCodeCon 2022. My name is Michael Cares and I'm your host. We are celebrating our second year with this global event focused on all things low code and open source. Our purpose is to bring together the low code and open source communities to share the experience and knowledge of thought leaders and experts from around the world. As the host company and organizer of the event, AOT Technologies is committed to the values of low code and open source. So much so that we developed our own free open source low code development platform, formsflow.ai, which is core to our strategic vision of democratized development for government and business. I'd like to introduce you today to our presenter, Shantoie Vorster, who is presenting on Is Low Code for Developers. Shantoie is a developer relations engineer at 2057. He loves learning new tech and sharing what he has learned with others. Shantoie strives to make things as easy as possible and wants others to reach their goals easily. Shantoie, over to you.
Thanks so much, Michael. And thank you for that wonderful introduction. Yes, so as you've heard, I'm Shantoie Vorster and I'm coming to you from South Africa. It's a little late here at night, but I'm super happy to be here and I'm extremely excited to see all of the interesting topics and the fantastic movement around low code. It's just been wonderful to see it during this conference, to see that low code is growing and that people are really embracing it. So what I want to talk to you about today is a question of, is low code for developers? And if I can rephrase it a little bit, I want to rephrase it as, is low code viable for developers? Now, the reason why I originally wanted to ask this question is, or wanted to explore this question a little bit, is because historically, I know that developers didn't necessarily have the best relationship with low code. Some developers would say that, no, you can't create critical applications with it. Some developers would say that, no, it's limiting or it boxes you in. And I asked this question also recently on Reddit and other social medias, and the responses I got was a little bit insane, but I think that's actually just the vocal minority that's still very much against low code. So if I can just quickly go over what we're going to discuss in this talk. Firstly, we're going to start off with just a little bit of who am I? And that's not some kind of a narcissistic thing that I just want to talk about myself. I want to introduce you to my history so that you can understand why I argue in the way that I argue. And then we're going to discuss if low code is for developers. And I'm going to basically go around this topic with my own experiences and tell you some lessons that I've learned from working with low code in an enterprise environment. And then we're going to talk a little bit about why the right tool is very important for your project and for your development. And lastly, we'll look at a low code tool that I think is very developer friendly. Of course, I would love to investigate and go into a lot more tools, but we only will have time for one. So I am not one of those people that like to kind of bring you through to the end of the talk and then come to a conclusion. I want to start with the conclusion and ask the question, is low code for developers? And from my personal experience, working in the financial sector in South Africa, especially in some of the major banks in South Africa, investment corporations, as well as insurance companies, I can say honestly and truthfully, yes, I definitely believe that low code is absolutely viable for developers. I believe that you can create critical application, business critical applications for your business with low code tools. And I also believe that low code can make the lives of your developers much better in terms of support, in terms of onboarding juniors, and simply just in terms of the amount of speed that you can produce applications with. So without further ado, who am I? So I'm Shantoie Vorster. As I said, I live in South Africa. And I studied IT, information technology, which was kind of this degree that was an amalgamation between, I would say, computer science, a little bit of business, and some information systems. And I was introduced into the IT field or into the IT industry, thinking that all applications are created with code and that's it. If I remember correctly, there was only a small little passage in one of my modules handbook, I think it was Introduction to Systems Analysis, where they talked about rapid application development, and there was a mention about low code. So I imagine my shock when I came to my first job as a software engineer, And I was introduced to this technology where you can create applications without writing a lick of code. I thought, goodness gracious, this is going to not work. This feels a little bit unnatural. It's totally different from what I've been taught. And I immediately thought that it will not really work out as well. But the more I started to work with the technology, I started realizing that it has so many benefits. Benefits beyond just implementing code quickly. There's other benefits that you would not think of, such as creating a kinder support environment or allowing you to, like I said, introduce your juniors into your development environment with much more ease. So then I started working as a software engineer. I was initially a systems analyst, but that changed into a software engineer where I worked with both pro-code and low-code tools. So when I talk about pro-code tools, I talk about, or I mean, the more traditional programming methodologies and programming languages such as C#, Java, Python, those type of things. So I was in projects where I saw how pro-code can create a system. And then I saw later on how low-code can create the similar system. And I was able to be in a unique position where I can compare these two and see the benefits of both. Then later on, I worked as a data warehouse developer. And there I got some experience more in the data engineering part of things. And again, I worked with pro-code. So we implemented data warehouses and data lakes using traditional pro-code tools. And then later on using low-code tools. And I was able to compare those again. And currently I'm a developer relations engineer at 2057. And I absolutely love it because it allows me to have these kind of talks with you and engage with the community and just share what I've learned and learn more things to share those things. So it's kind of, in my opinion, the perfect position. So I want to ask, or I want to focus on some enterprise projects where I use low code. So like I said, my experience was primarily in the financial sector in South Africa, working for some of the largest banks and also working in the investment sector and also the insurance sector. And there I worked on multiple projects using low code to develop their mission critical applications. We usually use two low code applications, one for pure backend development and one for pure front-end development. So some of the projects in which I worked was a data migration project where we basically transfer data from a very old system, like think DB2, into something more modern, like SQL Server. ETLs, goodness gracious, I've created so many ETLs in my life. And if it wasn't for low code, I don't think I'd be able to cope. I remember very clearly, there was this one project where we had to load, I think it was almost 20 or 30 files a day or something like that. And we needed a solution to quickly load those files into the system. And low-code's just the perfect tool for that. If you had to create code for something like that, obviously it will take a lot longer. But later on during my data warehouse development job, I was able to do some of those ETLs with code. And something that would usually take me a week to get, started from development, push to testing and into production, now all of a sudden took 3 months to develop. Then I worked on a client onboarding system. So this client onboarding system is for a major bank in South Africa. It's a pretty huge system. And the bank has multiple projects, multiple products that they need to roll out to the clients. And the client needs to be onboarded. So you need to do data capture. You need to get the forms out to the clients. The client needs to sign, and that needs to be sent back. Then due diligence and all of the legal needs to be done. And there's this entire business process that needs to be followed. So we created this entire system for the bank using two low-code tools, one tool focusing specifically on the backend. So this tool, the processes in the backend would do stuff like forms, send all of the notifications, do the email management, capture all of the data in the database, create APIs so that the data can be made available to all departments in the bank, things like that. And the front-end system the front-end part of the system would basically do all of the data capture, would allow the users to follow the process, would allow managers to see what their subordinates were up to, and would also give reporting. And this entire thing was created using only low code. No code was written to create it. And the team was quite big on it, actually. The team was usually about 8 people. And when there was large projects that came in, because this thing was also constantly in flux, there was constantly new products that the bank had to roll out. And then we would have to quickly create those flows and those applications for the bank. So we would constantly have enhancements and support on the system, and all of those things are going on at the same time. So sometimes the team would be 9 or 8, but it would grow as large as 12. So it's also a very interesting scenario where you have so many people working on this system that's created with low code, and they're all working together. Then there was the profile maintenance system, which is kind of ad hoc to the client onboarding system. And this system basically just maintained the profiles that were created for the client onboarding system. I created multiple APIs, both internal and external, using low code. That's with various levels of security. And then obviously data centralization is a very big part of any big company, any big enterprise in the world. So we did a bunch of data centralization projects, system integrations, naturally, and a bunch of reconciliation projects. And interesting about the reconciliation, I was part of a reconciliation project where we used Procode to create it. And I remember the project taking quite a long time. I think it was about 6 months to get into production. And earlier on, I did a project for a reconciliation, and that project was done with low code, and it took us only about a month to get it fully into production, tested, everything running. So there's obviously benefits when it comes to creating these applications with low code. Now, I want to just stand still and focus a little bit on what the statistics say. So the IDC, the International Data Corporation, did a survey on developer sentiment regarding low code. And they found that 68% of developers believe that low-code platforms can be used to create critical applications. And a further 79% of those developers believe that low-code platforms can increase job satisfaction. And even a further 80% of those developers believe that those platforms are helpful in automating repetitive tasks. So when I look at these statistics, remember in the beginning when I said I asked the question online and the response that I got was not necessarily as positive, that makes me kind of believe that the sentiment of low code is changing more for the positive among developers, and also that those that are slightly against it is kind of the vocal minority. And if I can elaborate a little bit on that, I believe that often developers have a bad feeling or have a bad experience with low-code tools because maybe they try to use the incorrect one for their project. Or traditionally, I remember, and this is kind of a controversial thing to say, but low-code was initially developed or initially marketed as the developer killer. Oh, scary. So I don't know if some people still have that bad taste in their mouth. But the statistics show that developer sentiment is really changing towards the positive. So lessons that I've learned from using low code on an enterprise environment. And obviously the first thing that comes to mind is quick development, because it's a very common low code trope. You can get something into production so quickly and so snappy, but that has some unforeseen kind of consequences or little surprises to it, because your developers are able to get something developed so quickly. It transforms them from being just people that focuses on writing code into technical problem solvers. And that's actually where I see developers moving. Developers used to traditionally be just people that only work on code. They sit in their own department. There's a business analyst that gives them requirements. But we're moving into a space where developers are now transforming into technical problem solvers. And I believe that low code is that gateway. It allows developers to move closer to business and move closer to the problem. So quick development, easier deployments. Most low-code platforms has a one-click deploy button or something that you can just push your application to a production server. And if you've ever had to create a production pipeline or a deployment pipeline, you know it can be quite the pain. So these easy deployments are definitely a fantastic boon. Then a kinder support environment. So this is something that I'm very passionate about because I've experienced it firsthand, especially working on some projects such as the client onboarding system, where you do development, you do enhancement to the system, and you're also responsible for some support on the system. And here's where low code can really make the difference. It can really create a kinder support environment in terms of how your developers debug problems, firstly. Because if we think about how you debug a traditional piece of code, you have to read through it. And even if you wrote that code 3 months ago, I was in this scenario today, wrote a piece of code 3 months ago, and wow, no idea what's happening. Everything looks like hieroglyphs. It's absolutely crazy. Whereas with low code, you can see, since it's objects that you drag and drop onto a canvas, you're able to kind of debug and understand what the flow is, and usually the error will pinpoint exactly where a problem is. And what we found also working with low code, many times the error isn't something that's wrong in code. It's a problem that exists because of maybe it was incorrect business logic that was implemented. Maybe maybe a business rule was misunderstood. So often it's more on the business logic side than it is physically code. So then also easy standardization of code. Sorry, I skipped one there. More time to focus on requirements. And this one comes natural with the quick deployments, because if you are able to quickly develop and quickly deploy your code, you have more time to focus on, am I really solving the right problem? And as I said, you're moving closer to business. Then easy standardization of code. So this one might be a little bit controversial, but working as since I have the experience of having worked as a developer, and I've seen and very much try to emphasize standardization, once it's crunch time and once the pressure is on, your standards, unfortunately, is the first thing that goes out of the window. It's a little thing that developers aren't supposed to tell, but it is unfortunately one of those things where your variables now become var1, var2, var3, a, b, c. And the problem won't necessarily be in the beginning when you're deploying or developing this thing. The problem will come up later when you need to enhance your product, or when you need to do support on it. And this is where low code really makes the difference in terms of standardization, because a component that you drag and drop onto a canvas is just that. It's always going to be, if you drag and drop a file reader, it's always going to be a file reader. Sure, there is going to be some difference in how you name things, or there might be some customization things, but the standardization is kind of imposed. And I found that especially in bigger teams and in enterprise teams, that can really, really help, especially when the pressure is on. And then quick automation of repetitive tasks. So again, let's say a developer has something that he needs to do. He needs to import, it's a backend developer, and they need to import about 100 files in a day. If they need to do that manually, it's going to take them quite a bit of time. But if they can use a low-code tool to automate that task, it's going to save them a lot of time and a lot of frustration. And then lastly, the point that I kind of want to emphasize the most, because I've made it the largest on my slide there, it creates a junior-friendly development environment. So this comes with a little bit of history. I did see in a pro code environment how the onboarding process for a junior, they say somebody straight out of a boot camp or straight out of university, how that works. And it honestly takes them quite a bit of time, firstly, because they need to read the code, understand what you're doing, understand the framework. Maybe it's a framework that they really haven't got much experience with. And they need to understand the nuances of your system and your standards and all those type of things. So it can become quite difficult for them to read that code and understand it. And I read a statistic, please don't quote me on this, I can't remember where I read it, but average, it takes about 6 months for a developer to really start becoming productive. Whereas with low code, I've seen something very strange, especially in an enterprise environment where we use low code. Often we can get brand new developers, somebody that comes straight out of university. We can give them training on the low-code tool for about 2 to 3 weeks, and then they get into a client and they start learning the system for about 2 to 3 weeks, sometimes less than that, and they can start doing support after that short amount of time. and they become a productive member of that team in such a quick time. And within no time, let's say about 2 to 3 months, they can start actually developing new pieces of the system. So low code really creates this developer friendly environment. And I believe it's because low code is often visual. It's often a lot easier to understand what you're doing. And it's just a lot more user friendly. If you think about a child playing with Lego blocks, that's pretty much what low code is for me. It's a strange analogy, but okay. So the right tool can make all the difference. Now, I want to say this because I have also been burned by choosing the incorrect low-code tool. And I honestly believe, like you've heard, I love low-code. I think it's fantastic. But I do believe that you need to choose the right tool for your project, for your culture, and for your developers. Otherwise, nobody's going to have a good time, and everybody's just going to have just going to be miserable. So the right tool can alleviate constraints on resources. And I hate talking about people as resources, but as we know, it is difficult to recruit developers. There is a kind of a developer shortage at this stage. And low code can really help with that because it's quicker to deploy, quicker to understand. You might need, and I'm saying might because it depends on your project, it depends on your situation, you might need less people to get the job done. And it can also alleviate other resource constraints such as time. Then it can help you to keep up with rapid requirement changes. And what I mean with this is we live in a time where requirements change so quickly. If you work in an enterprise, the company that you work for might bring on new projects every month, and you might need to adjust your process or your system for those new projects or for those new products so quickly and so rapidly that it would be hard to really keep up on a code level. Choosing the right tool choose a tool that allows for freedom in development. So here is something that you need to keep in mind when you choose a tool, especially when developers are going to use it. Developers want freedom. They want to be able to develop something where they can express themselves. And if they want to do something in a different way, they don't want to be boxed into a very specific way of doing something. And then choose a tool that is suited to your requirement and talent. If you have some people that are more to the BA side, then maybe choose something that follows a BPM or a workflow type approach. And if you have people that are more towards the developer side, then obviously it will make sense to choose something that allows them to import or implement some of their own code alongside low code. Right, so. And then just some things to be aware of. I put this slide in because these are common things that we need to just be aware of in low code, especially when working with developers. Be aware of the limitations of the tool. And this very much comes into research. So do your research before really dedicating yourself to a tool. Know that a tool takes time to learn. Your developers aren't going to pick it up and then on the same day deliver you this fantastic project. It will take time to learn some of the more nuanced things in the tool, like with anything. And then, of course, the cost of the tool. A lot of low-code platforms do come with a cost, and I believe that you pay for the convenience and for the time that you save. So I want to quickly talk to you about a tool that I believe is very developer friendly. It's my preferred backend low-code tool. It's a platform that specifically develops backends, and it's called Lynx. And I used it in most of the projects in which we created these enterprise systems in the banks and in the financial sector in South Africa. This was one of the tools that we used to create these systems. So this is one specifically for the backend. And the reason why I believe this tool is great for developers is because it follows very similar, it follows a programming paradigm. It basically, if you look at the top there, that little C# function over there, it is a function, it has parameters, it returns, whatever it does. So this one adds 2 numbers. Lynx, this is the Lynx designer underneath it. It's the IDE in which you create your applications, and it uses the same lingo. So you have functions, you create your application with top-down logic, and it uses parameters and return results and all of those things. So this isn't necessarily the only developer-friendly low-code tool. I believe there are tons of them out there. but this is an example. And I want to show you or highlight some things that can be good for your developers. So I'm going to quickly just show you a little bit about links. This is the links designer. As I said, the links designer, links comes in two parts. One part is the links designer. The other part is the links server. You design your applications on the links designer. You test them on here. And once you're ready, you deploy them to the server where they're hosted, monitored, and where anything is logged. So for this little demo, let's say we're going to create a very simple REST host, a REST API. And this REST API is going to have two endpoints or two methods. And if this is all like Greek to you and you have no idea what I'm saying, that's perfectly fine. I'll try and make it as user-friendly as possible. But what these two endpoints is going to do is the first one is going to read data from a database, and the other one is just going to read data from a file. And that's it. So Links works with plugins, and they've got quite a few of them. They've got compression, cryptography, C#. You can add in your own bit of C# code. So this is where when I speak about flexibility in a low-code tool, you want your developers to be able to have that freedom to develop what they need. And if the application can't natively give them if the application can't natively allow them to do that, then there should be a way for them to navigate around that little issue, or around that. So then we have the database. My apologies. I quickly just want to create a new solution. Oh dear. There we go. My apologies. I had a solution open, so everything's a little bit. There we go. Create solution. So yes, you want your tool to allow freedom for your developers to move around as they want. So you can do, like I said, C#. I'm going to add the database plugin because we're going to read from a database. You can do emails, all of that. I also want the file plugin. I think I skipped over it now. And then also the REST plugin. I'm just going to add those. And what we're going to do is this is where the flexibility becomes important. You can either create a REST host using OpenAPI 3 specification, or you can create it using a simple REST host, which will give you basically like a wizard that you can design your API with. I'm just going to put this on http localhost 5000, and the operations, we're going to go in here, and the first operation is going to be get data, because we're going to read data from a file. And we're going to make another one, read file. All right, I'm going to just create that, and then boom, it will create these two endpoints for us. So I'm not going to waste a lot of time, but this is the links designer. As I said, basically how it works is you drag and drop different components from here. You can do something like, this is Boolean, and I want to do an if-else check on it. And then you add in your conditions here in this what we call this the property tab. And then you just return a result. So it will then execute this logic from the top to the bottom. So what I'm going to do in this get data endpoint is I am going to add in an execute SQL component. And what we need is a connection string and a bit of SQL. So for my connection string, I've prepared one here. You could, if you want, add it in, but like with this thing here, and then test your connection. But I'm not going to do that because I want to save time. And then in terms of SQL, you can create as insane SQL or T-SQL queries as you wish, or you could just go to objects. And this will now load all of the objects in the database. And there's our table, and I can right click and say generate select. And there's our select query, and I can quickly execute that, and boom, there we go. Now we have our read data from our database, and I want to return a list of rows because I want to have all of that data and return it in my API, and then simply. Now you can understand here what I meant with this tool allows developers to kind of work in a way that they're used to, because a lot of these things kind of, if you're not a developer, this will all be gibberish. But if you are a developer, this will make a lot of sense because you're using return functions, using input parameters and all of that. I'm just going to assign the response body to this execute SQL. And there we go. We've developed the first endpoint to read data. Now I quickly want to do the read file one. So I'm just going to open this file reader here and grab this text file read component, change this to a list of lines also, the file path. I have a little client import CSV file here that I prepared. And if we go in here in the fields part, I can now very quickly go and say that, yes, I have a header. I can load these fields from the file. And there we go. There's my fields, name, surname, and number. And I just want to show you what the data looks like. So if I load the sample data here, this is what the data looks like. It has name, surname, number. Nathan Osmond is first. And we can go to formatted, and this will show us those fields neatly formatted here. I'm just going to click save. And this will now read the file. So this kind of brings into perspective how quickly you can develop a file reading process, or import or ETLs, create ETL systems with low code. And then just do this, and the response body is going to be the text file read. And then save that. And we're done. We've created the 2 endpoints for our REST service. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to debug this. And what debugging will do is it'll create a locally hosted version of the API for us to test. So I'm going to run this. I'm going to open Chrome, HTTP. Oh, there we go. I tested it earlier today. And there we go. There's our data coming from our database called through the API. And when I put this down there, you can see get data fired. And we can do read file. And there's our data coming through. We've got Nathan Osmond, and his cell phone number is there as well. And lastly, now that I've tested this thing, I can debug it. And this is that one-click deployment that I spoke of. We can deploy and open server. I'm just going to deploy it for now. Oh, I just need to save it. So let me just quickly save this as demo solution. There we go. And I'm going to open this link server panel here. Every user gets a login, and my password is password, which now I'm typing incorrectly because I'm in front of an audience. And what the link server does is this is where you host your applications and monitor them. So there's our solution that we are now deploying. This is an older one that I just loaded to show you with. Essentially, it has a simple REST host, same as that we had. You can turn it off and on. And whenever you call it, it's going to basically give you this little green indicator when it's success. And if any failure occurs, it will give it a red indicator. And then, of course, there's also logs, which will log. You can choose errors only, everything, those type of things. I'm just waiting for this thing to start. And then I'll show you. There we go. So the solution started. Let's quickly call this read file again. And if I call it again, it should fail now because I'm not debugging and the solution is off. Let me turn this REST host on and go back to Chrome, call this again. There we go. Nathan Osmond is there and gets data, call that, and there we go. So of course, we could do something else where we format this data much more neatly to present it in a very well-formatted JSON object and all of that. But I don't want to go into too much of detail in this presentation because I want to rather focus on my question, which was, is low-code for developers? So now that I've shown you a tool that I think works well for developers, I want to end off with this. Let's ask the question, is low-code for developers? And in my opinion, yes, definitely. Working in an enterprise environment with multiple high priority and very critical projects, I truly believe that low-code is viable for developers, and not just viable, but it will become something that is kind of important to work with because of the rapid requirement changes and the way that the world is just changing and we as developers need to adapt to basically keep up with that pace. So totally, I believe that it's viable. And of course, that comes with the caveat of it depends on your project, it depends on your budget, and it depends on your culture. Then I really want to emphasize on understanding the tool. So make sure that you understand the tool that you're going to get into, that you're going to choose. Make sure that you're choosing the right tool for your culture, for your environment, and for your developers. Get your developers involved in the conversation when you're choosing a tool. And lastly, know your requirement. And this is something that I do feel like we're all a little guilty of. We don't necessarily understand a requirement fully, but we want developers to create these fantastic systems for us. Know your requirement before starting to work on a project, because that will save you a lot of time and a lot of energy. Just a little added hint of bonus, or a bonus there. And yes, that's pretty much my talk. Thank you so much for allowing me this time to speak to you. You can reach me on Shantoie.Vorster at links.software. I'm also available on Twitter and on LinkedIn. Super happy for you to reach out. And yes, thank you so much for this time. I had an absolute blast. And I think it's time for questions now.
Thank you, Shantoie. Very much appreciated. Appreciate all your perspectives and good insights. We've got a question. The first question I have for you is, what kind of low-code tool should be avoided when selecting one for developers? Any insights there?
I think what you should rather keep in mind is your developers, the talent that you have available for you in your team. And I want to say, instead of trying to avoid a tool, rather get your developers involved in the conversation. Make sure that it's a tool that they would want to work with, and it's also a tool, and ensure that it's a tool that can allow them to do what they need to get done. Because often, like I said, it can be a situation where an incorrect tool is chosen for a job. Let's say I choose a back-end tool to create a front end. That's not necessarily going to work out all that well. So really get your developers involved.
Thank you. Good advice. Next question that has come up is, do you write tests using low-code tools like Links?
Yes, we have written tests to actually test some of the low-code applications that we build. It's not something that we do often, because what we have done in the teams, firstly, is we would create test cases and then run those. I apologize. We would do those manually. But what we have done is, if it is an application that goes through a lot of changes and there's a lot of regression testing that needed to be done, what we would do is we would create these little test applications in Links that would call either APIs, and that would basically ensure that you get the right responses, that would look out for errors, that would do kind of debugging for you. Because Links is basically like a very broad low-code development platform for any backend, you can kind of do those type of things. I hope that answers the question. If it doesn't, you're very welcome to harass me on my email.
It did for me, but I hope it did for the audience as well. Any other questions from the audience? We've got a little extra time, so if there are any, feel free.
If you can't think of anything now, again, you're welcome to reach out on social media. I'm super happy to answer your questions there as well.
I think that's good for now, Shantoie. Thank you so much. I want to say thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and experience. It's great to have you here today. And thank you to everyone who attended. For all the attendees, at the end of this session, when we close it out, there will be a quick feedback form, just asking you to respond. If you could update and provide some feedback, I think that'd be helpful for Shantoie as well as us. We appreciate everyone's participation, and especially to you, Shantoie, for taking the time out of your evening in South Africa. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a lovely evening.
You too.